The day my own son laughed at my $800 monthly pension check and called me a financial failure in front of his friends, he had no idea he was mocking a man worth over $12 million. I'm Robert Sullivan, and I've been living a lie for 20 years. Not the kind of lie that hurts people, the kind that reveals who they really are when they think you have nothing to offer them. My modest apartment, my 15-year-old Honda, my coupon-clipping lifestyle, it was all a test that my own flesh and blood was about to fail spectacularly. You see, when someone shows you their true colors, believe them the first time. And when that someone is the child you sacrificed everything for, the betrayal cuts deeper than any knife. But here's the thing about underestimating people. Sometimes the quiet old man you're mocking has more power than you ever imagined. By the time I was done teaching my son a lesson about respect, he'd lose everything he thought he was entitled to. And the look on his face when he realized what he'd thrown away, that moment was worth every penny of the fortune he never knew existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this all began, to the night that changed everything between a father and son forever. My name is Robert Sullivan, but everyone calls me Bob. I'm 68 years old, and if you saw me on the street, you'd probably think I was just another struggling retiree trying to make ends meet. That's exactly what I wanted you to think. For the past 3 years, since my beloved wife Sarah passed away from cancer, I've been living in a small one-bedroom apartment on the east side of town. I drive that old Honda I mentioned, shop with coupons religiously, and most of my clothes come from thrift stores. To the outside world, Bob Sullivan is a man who worked 40 years at the local factory and now survives on a modest pension and Social Security. But that's not the whole story. 20 years ago, my younger brother David called me with news that would change my life forever. He'd just sold his tech startup for $8 million, and he was sick. Terminal cancer, just like what would eventually take my Sarah. David had no children, no wife, and he wanted his big brother, the man who'd helped raise him after our parents died, to inherit everything. "Bob," he said, "promise me you won't let this money change you. You've got the best heart of anyone I know. Don't let wealth corrupt that." I promised him. And when David passed 6 months later, I kept that promise in a way he never could have imagined. I took that $8 million, invested it wisely with the help of a discreet financial advisor, and watched it grow to over $12 million over the past 2 decades. But I never changed my lifestyle, not one bit. Why? Because I wanted to see who people really were when they thought I had nothing to give them. I wanted to know if the relationships in my life were built on love and respect, or on what people thought they could get from me. Unfortunately, that test would soon extend to my own son. Michael is 32 years old, works in sales, and on paper, he's everything a father should be proud of. College educated, decent job, charming personality when he wants to be. But somewhere along the way, especially after his mother died, Michael became obsessed with appearances and status. He started measuring people's worth by the size of their bank accounts and the brands they wore. He'd always been a little materialistic, but after Sarah's death, it got worse. He started making comments about my cheap lifestyle, my old car, my modest apartment. At first I thought it was grief. Losing his mother had hit him hard. But as the months passed, those comments became cruel. They became personal attacks on who I was as a man, as a father, as a human being. Michael makes about $80,000 a year, which is good money, but he spends like he makes twice that. Expensive car lease, designer clothes, dining out every night, trips he can't afford. He's drowning in credit card debt, but he puts on this facade of success that everyone around him believes, including his girlfriend Jessica, a woman who measures a man's worth by his wallet and makes no secret about it. She's been pushing Michael to propose, but only if he can afford the kind of ring that will impress her friends on social media. Then there are his buddies Tom and Rick, 2 shallow guys who treat money like it's the only thing that matters in life. When they're around, Michael gets even worse, trying to impress them with his supposed sophistication while looking down on anyone he considers beneath his status. What none of them knew was that the poor old man they were about to start mocking could buy and sell them all without even checking his bank balance. The stage was set for a confrontation that would change everything. And it all started with a simple dinner invitation that I would regret for the rest of my life. It was a Thursday evening in October when Michael called and asked if he could bring Jessica and a couple of friends over for dinner. I was thrilled. Despite our growing distance, I still loved my son desperately, and any chance to spend time with him felt like a gift.
"Dad, we'll be there around 7, he said. "Just make something simple, nothing fancy." I spent the entire afternoon preparing, made his favorite pot roast the way his mother used to make it, set the table with our good dishes, not expensive ones, mind you, but the nicest ones I had. I even picked up a bottle of wine, which was a splurge on my supposed budget. When they arrived, I could immediately sense something was off. Michael had this smirk on his face, and Jessica and the guys were exchanging glances like they were in on some private joke. But I pushed that feeling aside. I was just happy to have a house full of people again. We sat down to dinner, and everything seemed normal at first. We talked about work, the weather, local news, typical small talk. But then, as I was clearing the main course, something happened that I'll never forget. My pension check was sitting on the kitchen counter where I'd left it after depositing most of it earlier that day. It was one of those direct deposit notifications they send, showing the amount, $847. "Hey, Dad," Michael called out, noticing the paper. "What's that?" I was actually excited to share. "Oh, that's my pension statement. Good news, they gave us a small cost of living increase this month, 3% bump." I walked back into the dining room, genuinely proud. "You know, son, after 40 years of hard work, it feels good to know that money is there every month. Your mother and I always believed in honest work, and—" That's when Michael started laughing. Not a chuckle, not a polite smile, full-blown laughter. "$847, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Dad, that's embarrassing. How do you even survive on that pittance?" Jessica joined in with her own little laugh. "Oh my God, Michael, you didn't tell me it was that bad." I felt my face flush, but I tried to keep my composure. "Well, it's not a fortune, but combined with Social Security and my small savings—" "Small savings?" Tom interrupted, grinning. "What, like $1,000 in a coffee can?" Rick snorted. "My car payment is more than his monthly income." But the worst was yet to come. Michael, my own son, the boy I'd raised with love and sacrifice, looked at me with genuine disgust and said, "Dad, you're embarrassing me. Seriously, how do you even show your face in public knowing you're such a financial failure?" The words hit me like physical blows. Financial failure. From the mouth of my own child. "I mean, look at this place," Jessica added, gesturing around my modest apartment. "I can't believe Michael grew up like this. No wonder he's so driven to succeed. He never wants to end up like this." "What like what?" I asked, quietly, my voice barely steady. "Poor," she said, matter-of-factly. "Unsuccessful. A cautionary tale." Michael nodded in agreement. "She's right, Dad. You had 40 years to build something, to invest, to grow wealth, and this is what you have to show for it? $800 a month and an apartment that looks like it's stuck in 1985? Tom raised his beer bottle in a mock toast. "Here's to the American dream, everyone. Work your whole life and end up with less than minimum wage." They all laughed. Every single one of them laughed at my life, my choices, my supposed failures. And Michael, the son I'd worked double shifts to put through college, the boy I'd sacrificed everything for, laughed the loudest of all. But the absolute worst moment was still coming. "You know what, guys?" Michael said, his voice getting more animated with each word. "I'm actually ashamed to call on my father in front of my friends. Like, how do I explain that I come from this? How do I tell people my dad is basically living in poverty?" Jessica leaned over and whispered something in his ear, but she whispered loud enough for me to hear. "I don't know how you turned out so successful with such a loser for a father. and my son, my own flesh and blood, nodded and replied, "Trust me, I learned what not to do by watching him." The room fell silent except for their continued snickering. I stood there, holding my pension statement in shaking hands, realizing that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with my son was a lie. But then Tom decided to twist the knife even deeper. "Hey Bob, you know they're hiring greeters at Walmart. Might be a good way to supplement that pathetic pension." More laughter, more cruel, heartless laughter. And that's when Michael delivered the final blow. "Don't worry about it, guys. When he dies, there won't be much to inherit anyway. Maybe enough to cover the funeral costs if we're lucky." In that moment, something inside me died. Not from the cruelty of strangers, I could handle that, but from the realization that my own son saw me as nothing more than an embarrassment, a failure, a cautionary tale to share with his friends.
I quietly gathered the dinner dishes, my hands trembling with hurt and rage. As they continued their conversation, moving on to other topics like nothing had happened, I made a decision that would change all of our lives forever. It was time to teach my son a lesson about judging people by their bank accounts. A lesson he would never, ever forget. What happened that night wasn't a one-time thing. It was the beginning of a pattern that would get worse and worse over the following weeks. Michael had tasted blood, and he seemed to enjoy the power of putting his old man in his place. The very next weekend, he invited himself over for lunch and brought Jessica along. But this time, when the check came at the small diner we went to, Michael made a show of looking at his wallet and sighing dramatically. "Dad, I hate to do this, but can you cover lunch? I'm a little short this week." Then, loud enough for the people at the next table to hear, he added, "I know it's probably half your monthly budget, but I'll pay you back when I can." The server looked at me with pity. Other customers started glancing our way. I was being humiliated in public by my own son, and he was enjoying every second of it. But it got worse. A week later, Michael stopped by my apartment with Rick and Tom. They'd been drinking, and their inhibitions were completely gone. They started going through my refrigerator, commenting on my poor people food. They made jokes about my furniture, my TV, my everything. "Check this out," Rick called from my bedroom. "Bob's got a 13-inch TV from the Clinton administration. And look at these sheets. I think my grandmother had the same pattern in 1992. Michael was just standing there, letting it happen. When I asked them to please show some respect for my home, my own son said, "Dad, relax, they're just having fun. Besides, it's not like you have anything valuable they could damage." That comment hit me like a truck. If only he knew that the worthless old man he was mocking had more money in his checking account than all three of them would make in the next 5 years combined. But the real escalation came when Jessica started getting involved more directly. She began pressuring Michael to distance himself from me entirely, claiming I was dragging down his image and holding him back professionally and socially. "Babe, you can't bring your dad to company events looking like that," she told him during one of their conversations that I wasn't supposed to overhear. "People will think you come from nothing. It reflects poorly on your success." Michael agreed with her. He actually agreed with her. Soon he stopped inviting me to anything important. His work holiday party? "It's really just for employees, Dad." His birthday celebration? "We're going somewhere expensive that would be uncomfortable for you." A promotion celebration dinner? "The crowd wouldn't really be your type." Each excuse was a knife in the heart, but I kept taking it because I loved my son and hoped he'd remember who raised him with love and sacrifice. Then came the day that almost broke me entirely. Michael showed up at my apartment with a folder of papers and a concerned expression that I initially mistook for genuine care. "Dad, we need to talk about your future," he said, sitting down at my small kitchen table.
Jessica and I have been researching senior living facilities, and we think it's time you seriously considered making a move. I looked at the brochures he'd brought. They were for the cheapest, most basic assisted living places in the area, not nice retirement communities. Bare-bones facilities that looked more like hospitals than homes. Son, I'm perfectly capable of living independently. I'm only 68 and I'm in good health. But you're struggling financially, he insisted. These places provide meals, basic care, social activities. It would actually save you money, and you wouldn't have to worry about maintaining an apartment or buying groceries. What he was really saying was, Dad, you're an embarrassment, and I want you tucked away somewhere where my friends won't have to see how you live. The brochures showed tiny rooms, shared bathrooms, cafeteria-style dining. These weren't places where people lived. They were places where people went to die quietly and out of the way. Michael, I said carefully, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not ready for assisted living. I like my independence. He sighed dramatically, like I was being unreasonable. Dad, you're being stubborn. Face facts. You can't afford to keep living like this much longer. At least in one of these places, you'd have some dignity. Dignity. He was talking to me about dignity while trying to warehouse me in the cheapest facility he could find. But the worst part came when he pulled out his phone and started showing me pictures from his social media.
Look, Dad, this is the kind of life I'm building. This is the restaurant Jessica and I went to last weekend, $200 per person. This is the car I'm looking at upgrading to next year. This is the neighborhood where we're thinking about buying a house. Every picture was designed to show me how successful he was, and by contrast, how much of a failure I was. He was literally rubbing his lifestyle in my face while simultaneously trying to convince me to move into what was essentially a glorified nursing home. The point is, he continued, I'm moving up in the world, and I need to focus on my future. Taking care of a struggling parent is, well, it's a distraction I can't afford right now. A distraction. That's what 40 years of love and sacrifice had earned me, the label of distraction. That night, after Michael left with his brochures and his condescending advice, I sat in my modest living room and made a decision. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, James Morrison, who had been handling my financial affairs for the past decade. Jim, it's Bob Sullivan. I think it's time we had a conversation about my will. Of course, Bob. What's on your mind? I want to make some changes. Significant changes. There was a pause on the other end. Bob, you know your current will leaves everything to Michael. Are you sure you want to modify that? I looked around my apartment. The same apartment my son wanted me to abandon for a glorified prison cell. The same apartment where he'd allowed his friends to mock me, humiliate me, and treat me like a burden on society. Jim, I'm very sure. But before I make any final decisions, I want to run a little experiment. I want to see if the son I raised is still somewhere inside the man who's been treating me like garbage. What kind of experiment? The kind that will either save our relationship or end it forever. As I hung up the phone, I realized that the stakes had just gotten much, much higher. This wasn't just about teaching Michael a lesson anymore. It was about discovering whether I had a son worth leaving a fortune to, or whether I needed to find more deserving recipients for the wealth he didn't even know existed. Either way, the real test was about to begin. The next morning, I started what would become the most thorough investigation of my life. If Michael wanted to judge me by my financial worth, then it was time I took a close look at his. My first call was to a private investigator named Sarah Chen, no relation to my neighbor Mrs. Chen despite the name. Sarah specialized in financial backgrounds and had helped me vet some investment opportunities over the years. She knew about my real financial situation and never judged my choice to live modestly. Bob, what exactly are you looking for? She asked,
after I explained what I needed. I want to know everything about my son's finances. His income, his debts, his spending patterns, his credit score, everything. But I want to know who he really is when he thinks no one is watching. That's going to take some time and cost some money. I almost laughed. Sarah, cost is not an issue. Just get me the truth. What she discovered over the next 2 weeks was shocking, even to me. Michael wasn't just struggling financially, he was drowning. Despite his $80,000 salary, he had racked up $45,000 in credit card debt across 7 different cards. His car payment was $850 a month for a BMW he couldn't afford. His rent was taking 60% of his take-home pay because he insisted on living in the trendy part of town to maintain his image. But the real kicker was he was 3 months behind on his car payments and had been juggling balance transfers to avoid defaulting on his credit cards. This successful, sophisticated man who mocked his father's $800 pension was actually living paycheck to paycheck and one financial emergency away from bankruptcy. Even more interesting were his social media posts, which Sarah had screenshotted for evidence. On Instagram and Facebook, Michael portrayed himself as wildly successful, posting pictures of expensive meals, designer clothes, and luxury experiences. But when you dug deeper, you could see the desperation. He was literally living for the gram, spending money he didn't have to impress people who probably didn't care. And Jessica? She was even worse. Sarah's investigation revealed that she dumped 2 previous boyfriends the moment she discovered they weren't as wealthy as they had initially appeared. She was currently pressuring Michael for a $3,000 engagement ring, completely unaware that he'd probably have to take out a personal loan to afford it. But the most damning evidence came from Michael's own words. Sarah had found several posts in private groups where Michael complained about having to deal with his broke father, and speculated about whether I had any life insurance or hidden assets that might be worth inheriting. The old man lives like he's got nothing, but he worked for 40 years. He's got to have something stashed away, right? I'm just waiting for the right time to bring up the inheritance conversation.
Another post was even worse. Sometimes I think about all the money I could have saved over the years if I'd just put the old man in a home and sold his stuff. He's got to be sitting on at least 10 or 20 grand, but he's too selfish to help out his struggling son. Reading those words felt like being stabbed in the heart. My son wasn't just disrespecting me to my face, he was plotting behind my back, treating me like an asset to be liquidated rather than a father who deserved love and respect. That's when I decided to get creative with my plan. Phase 1 was simple. I would create a financial crisis for myself and see how Michael responded. If there was any decency left in him, any love or compassion, surely he would help his struggling father in a time of need. I called Michael on a Tuesday evening, making sure my voice sounded worried and frail. "Son, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come over this weekend?" "What's wrong, Dad? You sound upset." "It's my finances. I've been trying to handle it on my own, but I think I'm in real trouble." There was a pause, and I could practically hear the wheels turning in his head. "What kind of trouble?" "I'll explain everything when you get here. But Michael, I might need to ask for your help." The change in his tone was immediate. Suddenly, Michael was very interested in his father's problems. "Of course, Dad. I'll be there Saturday morning." Saturday came, and Michael arrived with Jessica in tow. I had prepared for this meeting like an actor preparing for the role of his life. "Thank you both for coming," I began, looking as defeated as possible. "I've been trying to handle this myself, but I think I've made some mistakes." I pulled out fake medical bills that I'd created. Nothing illegal, just realistic-looking documents that suggested I'd been hiding some health issues and the associated costs. I've been dealing with some health problems that I didn't want to worry you with, but the medical bills are adding up, and my insurance doesn't cover everything. I've been dipping into my small savings to cover the costs. Michael leaned forward, suddenly very attentive. How much are we talking about, Dad? I'm down to my last few $100s, and I need to have some work done on the car. It failed inspection, and they're saying it needs about $500 in repairs to pass. I watched their faces carefully. This was the moment of truth. Would my son offer to help his struggling father? Would he show even a shred of the compassion and love I'd shown him throughout his entire life? Michael exchanged a glance with Jessica before answering. Dad, that's really tough. I wish I could help, but Jessica and I are saving for some important things right now. Maybe you could get a second opinion on the car. Sometimes mechanics try to overcharge older folks. My heart sank, but I pressed on. Son, I hate to ask this, but what about a small personal loan? Just enough to cover the immediate expenses. I'm scared I might lose my apartment if I can't keep up with basic costs. The look that passed between Michael and Jessica told me everything I needed to know. They weren't concerned about my well-being. They were annoyed that I was bothering them with my problems. Dad, you're 68 years old. At some point, you need to figure these things out for yourself. I can't be bailing you out every time you have a financial emergency. Besides, he continued with exaggerated patience, maybe this is a wake-up call. You've been living beyond your means for years, and now reality is catching up to you. Sometimes the best help I can give you is to let you learn from your mistakes. I was asking my son, who I raised, educated, and supported through every difficulty in his life, for $500 to fix my car, and he was lecturing me about personal responsibility while sitting in my living room wearing a watch that cost more than my supposed monthly income? But the truly revealing moment came as they were leaving. I overheard Jessica whisper to Michael in the hallway, "Thank God you didn't give him any money. I was worried you might get all sentimental and mess up our vacation fund." Michael whispered back, "Don't worry. I learned a long time ago not to throw good money after bad. He made his choices." His choices. The choice to work 40 years to provide for his family, the choice to sacrifice for his son's education and future, the choice to live modestly and save responsibly. Those were the choices Michael was dismissing as mistakes worth punishing. As their car pulled away, I sat in my living room and realized that the son I'd raised and loved was gone. In his place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than a burden, an embarrassment, and a cautionary tale. That night, I called Mrs. Chen and asked her to come over for tea. It was time to bring in my secret weapon. "Mrs. Chen," I said, after explaining everything that had been happening, "I need a favor, and it's a big one." She listened carefully as I outlined my plan. By the time I was finished, she was smiling like a woman half her age. "Robert," she said, "I've been waiting 20 years to see someone teach that boy some manners. Count me in." The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for my son to walk into it. 3 weeks later, I made the call that would change everything. "Michael, I'd like you to come over for dinner this Sunday, and bring Jessica, Tom, and Rick if they're available. I have something important I need to discuss with the family." I could hear the excitement in his voice, barely contained. "What's it about, Dad?" "It's time we talked about the future, about my will and, well, about what happens to my affairs when I'm gone." Hook, line, and sinker. Michael practically tripped over himself agreeing to dinner. For the first time in months, he was eager to spend time with his old man. Sunday arrived, and I spent the afternoon preparing what would either be the most satisfying or most heartbreaking meal of my life. I made all of Michael's favorites, set the table with my best dishes, and arranged everything perfectly for what was about to unfold. They arrived promptly at 6, and I could tell they were all buzzing with anticipation. Michael had clearly told them that this might be about inheritance, and suddenly everyone was very interested in being nice to poor old Bob. "Dad, you look great," Michael said, giving me what might have been the first genuine hug he'd offered in years. "How are you feeling? Any more health problems?" Jessica was uncharacteristically sweet, complimenting my apartment and asking if she could help with anything.
Tom and Rick were actually polite, commenting on how good the food smelled and thanking me for inviting them. It was amazing how quickly people's attitudes could change when they thought money might be involved. We sat down to dinner, and the conversation was lighter than it had been in months. They asked about my health, my daily routine, even my opinions on current events. For a moment, I almost let myself believe that maybe I'd been wrong about all of them. But then, as we finished the main course, Michael brought up what was really on his mind. "Dad, you mentioned on the phone that you wanted to talk about your will and your affairs. Is everything okay? Are you sick?" The concern in his voice might have fooled someone else, but I could see the calculation behind his eyes. He wasn't worried about losing his father. He was worried about losing his inheritance. "Well, son, I've been doing a lot of thinking lately about legacy and what kind of man I want to be remembered as. And I realized that before I make any final decisions about my estate, there are some things we need to clear up." I stood up and walked to my desk where I had placed a manila folder filled with documents. The room went completely silent as I returned to the table. "First, I want to share something with all of you, something I probably should have mentioned earlier." I pulled out the private investigator's report and spread the papers across the table, like a dealer laying out cards. "Michael, did you know that you currently owe $45,037 across 7 different credit cards?" His face went white. "Dad, how do you... Did you know that you're 3 months behind on your car payments and are currently at risk of repossession?" Jessica's mouth fell open. She clearly had no idea about the extent of Michael's financial problems. "Did you know that despite making $80,000 a year, your net worth is actually negative $38,000? Tom and Rick looked like they wanted to disappear into their chairs. But I wasn't done. "And Jessica, were you aware that your boyfriend has been lying about his financial situation? That fancy lifestyle you've been enjoying? It's all built on credit card debt and loans he can't afford to repay." She turned to stare at Michael with a look of pure betrayal. "You told me you were financially stable. You said you had savings." It's not as bad as he's making it sound," Michael stammered, but I cut him off. "Oh, but it gets better. Tom, Rick, do you want to know what your friend really thinks about you?" I pulled out printouts of Michael's social media posts, including some private messages where he'd complained about having to pay for drinks when they went out and called them hangers-on who contribute nothing to my success. The dynamic in the room shifted instantly. These weren't friends anymore. They were people discovering they'd been lied to and used. But the real revelation was still coming. Now, let me share something else with all of you. Something about the financial failure you've all been mocking for the past few months. I walked back to my desk and retrieved my real bank statements, the ones showing my actual net worth. "Michael, do you remember that night when you laughed at my $800 pension check? When you called me a failure in front of your friends?" His face was ashen, but he nodded. "Well, let me show you something interesting." I placed the bank statement in front of him, watching his eyes as he processed the numbers. $12,347,612. That's my actual net worth, son. The broke old man you've been ashamed of could buy and sell everyone at this table without even thinking about it." The silence was deafening. Jessica's mouth was hanging open. Tom and Rick looked like they had been hit by a truck. And Michael looked like his entire world was collapsing. "But Dad, if you had all this money, why were you living like this?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were, Michael. I wanted to know if the son I raised with love and sacrifice would show that same love and sacrifice to his father when he thought I had nothing to offer." I pulled out my phone and started playing the recordings I'd made of our recent conversations. "Let's listen to your response when I asked for help with my car repairs, shall we?" Michael's voice filled the room. "Dad, you need to be more realistic about your financial situation. Maybe it's time to sell the car entirely. You're 68 years old. At some point, you need to figure these things out for yourself." "And here's what you said when I mentioned I might lose my apartment." Another recording. "Maybe this is a wake-up call. You've been living beyond your means for years. Sometimes the best help I can give you is to let you learn from your mistakes." Michael was staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. "Your father, the man who worked double shifts to pay for your college education, asked you for $500 to fix his car, and you told him to take the bus." I pulled out more evidence, screenshots of his social media posts, copies of his complaints about his broke father, records of every cruel comment and dismissive gesture. But the real test came when I asked for your help, when I was supposedly at my lowest point, facing financial ruin and health problems. Do you remember what you did, Michael? He was crying now, tears streaming down his face as he realized the magnitude of what he'd done. "You abandoned me, Michael. You told me to figure it out myself. You let me believe I might lose my home rather than lend me the cost of a nice dinner out." I turned to address the whole table. "Ladies and gentlemen, meet the real Michael Sullivan. A man so concerned with appearances that he'd rather let his father suffer than risk $500 of his own money. A man so obsessed with status that he's borrowed himself into bankruptcy while mocking the people who actually have money." Jessica stood up abruptly. I can't. I need to go. Michael, we need to talk. Outside, now." As they argued in hushed tones by the door, I continued my presentation for Tom and Rick. "Gentlemen, I hope you have learned something here tonight about the danger of judging people by their appearances. The man you've been mocking and treating like a servant could have bought both of your houses without blinking." They mumbled apologies and excuses, grabbing their coats and practically running for the door. But the final confrontation was yet to come. Michael came back inside alone, his face red from crying and arguing with Jessica. I could hear her car peeling out of the parking lot. Clearly their relationship hadn't survived the revelation of his lies and debt. "Dad," he said, his voice broken, "I don't understand. If you had all this money, why didn't you tell me? Why did you let me struggle? Why did you watch me make all these mistakes?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, and for a moment I saw the little boy I'd raised, the child who used to run to me for comfort when he was scared or hurt. But then I remembered his laughter, his cruelty, his complete lack of compassion when he thought I needed help. "Michael, sit down. Let me tell you a story about your Uncle David." He sank into his chair, looking defeated. "When David left me this money 20 years ago, he made me promise that it wouldn't change who I was. He said wealth had a way of corrupting people, of making them lose sight of what really mattered. So I decided to use it as a test. I pulled out the original copy of my will, the one that left everything to Michael. This is my will, son, the real one. Until tonight, you were set to inherit every penny of my wealth. $12 million that would have set you up for life, eliminated your debts, and given you the financial security you'd been desperately seeking." His eyes widened as he stared at the document. "But here's what you never understood, Michael. I wasn't just testing whether people would be nice to me for my money. I was testing whether they would be decent to me without money. Whether they would show basic human compassion to someone they thought had nothing to offer them." I started pacing around the room, 20 years of hurt and disappointment finally pouring out. "Do you know what your mother used to say about you when you were little? She said you had the kindest heart of any child she ever seen. You would give away your lunch to kids who forgot theirs. You cried when you saw homeless people on the street. You begged us to donate your birthday money to animal shelters." Michael was sobbing now, but I couldn't stop. What happened to that boy, Michael? When did you become someone who could mock his own father's struggles? When did you decide that a person's worth was measured by their bank account? Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... You didn't mean what? To humiliate me in front of your friends? To refuse help when I was desperate? To call me a financial failure and an embarrassment? I sat back down across from him, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. Michael, I would have given you everything. Not just the money, everything. My love, my support, my guidance, my time. But you had to earn my respect first. You had to show me that the values your mother and I taught you were still somewhere inside the man you'd become. I pulled out a second document, a new will I'd had drafted but never signed. This is what I prepared after our conversation about my car repairs. In this version, you get $800, 1 month of the pension you found so pathetic. The rest goes to charity and to Mrs. Chen, who showed me more kindness in 1 week than my own son showed me in a year. His face crumpled completely. Dad, please, I can change. I can be better. I was so stressed about money, and Jessica was pressuring me, and I thought... You thought what? That it was okay to take out your stress on your father? That your financial problems gave you the right to treat me like garbage? I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the parking lot where my son's friends had fled and his girlfriend had abandoned him. Michael, tonight you lost a $12 million inheritance because you couldn't spare $500 to help your father. You lost your relationship because you built it on lies and debt. You lost your friends because they discovered you'd been talking about them behind their backs. I turned back to face him. But most importantly, you lost your father's respect. And that, son, is something that can't be bought back with apologies or promises to change. Michael fell to his knees, literally begging. Dad, please, give me another chance. I'll do anything. I'll prove to you that I can be the son you raised me to be. For a moment, my heart softened. This was still my child, the boy I loved unconditionally for 32 years. But then I remembered his laughter, his cruelty, his complete lack of compassion when he thought I needed help.
Michael, do you know what the saddest part of all this is? He looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. The saddest part is that if you had just shown me basic human decency, if you had offered to help when I needed it, if you had defended me when your friends attacked me, if you had treated me like a human being worthy of respect, none of this would have happened. You would have inherited everything, and more importantly, you would have kept your father's love. I walked over to my desk and picked up both versions of the will. But you know what, son? I'm not going to make this decision tonight. I'm not going to let anger and hurt determine your future in a moment of emotion. Hope flickered in his eyes. Instead, I'm going to give you something much more valuable than money. I'm going to give you a chance to earn back what you've lost. Not the inheritance, that you'll have to prove you deserve over time, but the relationship with your father. I tore up the will that disinherited him, but I also put the original will away. From now on, Michael, you're going to have to show me who you really are. Not when you think there's money involved, not when you're trying to impress people, but when you think no one is watching and there's nothing in it for you. What do you mean? I mean, you're going to start treating people, all people, with respect and kindness. You're going to figure out your financial problems without expecting handouts from anyone. You're going to learn what it means to work for something and appreciate what you have instead of always wanting more. I sat back down and looked at my son. Really looked at him. And if you can do that, if you can become the man I raised you to be instead of the man you've chosen to become, then maybe we can rebuild what we've lost, both the relationship and the inheritance. Michael wiped his eyes and nodded frantically. Yes, Dad. Yes, I'll do whatever it takes. But if you slip back into your old ways, if you start treating people poorly again, or if this turns out to be just another manipulation to get access to my money, then this is the last conversation we'll ever have as father and son." The weight of that statement hung in the air between us. "Do you understand what I'm telling you, Michael?" "I understand, Dad, and I won't let you down, I promise." As he left that night, I wasn't sure if I'd just saved my relationship with my son or if I'd simply postponed its inevitable end. But for the first time in months, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was hope for us yet. The real test, however, was just beginning. 6 months have passed since that confrontational dinner, and I wish I could tell you that everything changed overnight. But real change, the kind that matters, doesn't happen that quickly. The first few weeks were brutal for Michael. Jessica not only broke up with him, but she also told everyone in their social circle about his financial lies and massive debt. His carefully constructed image of success crumbled completely. Tom and Rick stopped returning his calls after they learned what he'd really been saying about them behind their backs. Michael had to move out of his expensive apartment and into a modest one-bedroom place across town. His BMW was repossessed, and he had to buy a used Honda Civic, ironically not much newer than my own car. He took on a second job delivering food on weekends to help pay down his credit cards. For the first month, I wondered if this was all just an elaborate performance designed to get back into my good graces. Was he learning humility, or was he just better at hiding his true feelings? But then something interesting happened. Mrs. Chen called me one evening with a story that changed everything. "Robert," she said, "I was at the grocery store today, and I saw your son in the parking lot. There was an elderly woman struggling with her groceries, and without hesitation, he helped her load them into her car. Then he waited to make sure her car started before leaving." "That's nice of him," I replied, though I was still skeptical. "But here's the thing. I was watching him, and when the woman tried to tip him, he refused. He just said he was happy to help." Over the following weeks, Mrs. Chen and other neighbors started reporting similar incidents. Michael volunteering at the food bank, where he'd signed up to fulfill community service hours, but continuing to show up long after his requirement was met. Michael helping an elderly man fix his fence without being asked. Michael giving his lunch to a homeless person and pretending he wasn't hungry. These weren't grand gestures designed to impress anyone. They were small acts of kindness that he thought no one was noticing. More importantly, when he visited me, which he started doing every Sunday, he never mentioned money, inheritance, or his financial struggles unless I brought them up. Instead, we talked about books, about his mother's memory, about current events, about life. Slowly, I began to see glimpses of the boy I'd raised. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday in March. I was walking home from the post office when I slipped on the wet pavement and twisted my ankle badly. I was sitting on the sidewalk, embarrassed and in pain, when Michael's old Honda pulled up. He'd been driving by on his way to his second job, and he immediately pulled over to help. "Dad, what happened? Are you hurt?" He helped me to his car, drove me to the urgent care clinic, and waited with me for 3 hours while I got x-rays and treatment. He never once complained about missing work or losing money from his delivery job. "Michael," I said as he helped me into my apartment that evening, "you're going to be late for your shift." "Dad, work can wait. Making sure you're okay is more important." That's when I knew. The son I'd raised was still there, underneath all the materialism and status-seeking that had corrupted him. It had taken losing everything for him to remember what really mattered. 3 months later, I asked Michael to have dinner with me, just the two of us. No drama, no revelations, no tests. "Son," I said as we finished eating, "I want you to know how proud I am of the changes you've made." He looked surprised. "Dad, I still have a long way to go. I'm still paying off debt, I'm still learning how to live within my means, and I'm still working on not judging people by what they have." "But you're doing the work, Michael.
You're becoming the man your mother and I always believed you could be." I pulled out a document I'd been carrying for weeks, a new will that restored Michael as my primary beneficiary, but with conditions. "I'm not giving you everything back, not yet, but I want you to know that your inheritance is secure, provided you continue on this path of growth and service to others." His eyes filled with tears. "Dad, I don't need the money anymore. Having you back in my life, having your respect again, that's worth more than any amount of money." "I know you mean that, son, and that's exactly why you're going to get the inheritance eventually." We spent the next hour talking about his plans for the future. He'd started dating again, a teacher named Maria, who knew about his financial struggles and didn't care. He was considering going back to school to become a social worker. He wanted to use his experience with debt and financial recovery to help other people avoid the mistakes he'd made. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Do you think Mom would be proud of who I'm becoming?" I reached across the table and took his hand. "Michael, your mother loved you unconditionally, just like I do. She would be proud that you found your way back to the values she taught you, and she'd be proud that you learned from your mistakes instead of being destroyed by them." As we said goodbye that night, Michael hugged me the way he used to when he was young. Not the polite, obligatory embraces he'd been giving me for years, but the real, heartfelt hugs of a son who genuinely loves his father. Looking back on this whole experience, I've learned something important about wealth and family and the complicated relationships between them. Money doesn't just change how people treat you, it changes how you see them. When I hid my wealth, I got to see people's true character. But I also learned that sometimes good people make bad choices when they're stressed, scared, or influenced by the wrong crowd. Michael wasn't a bad person. He was a good person who'd lost his way, who'd gotten caught up in a culture that values appearance over substance, possessions over relationships. The hardest lesson for me was realizing that some of his behavior might have been my fault. By hiding my wealth, I'd also hidden the security that might have allowed him to make better choices. If he'd known he had a financial safety net, would he have gotten so desperate? Would he have been so cruel? I'll never know for sure, but I've made peace with my decision. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes people need to lose everything before they can appreciate anything. Today, Michael and I have lunch every Sunday at a small diner downtown, the same place where he once humiliated me by making me pay while complaining about my budget. But now, we split the check equally, and our conversations are about books we're reading, places we want to travel, and memories of his mother.
As for my fortune, I've decided to use it in a way that would make both David and Sarah proud. I'm setting up a foundation to help families navigate financial crises without destroying their relationships. I want to help other parents and children avoid the pain that Michael and I went through. Michael will inherit a substantial amount when I'm gone, but he'll also inherit the responsibility of continuing that work. By then, I'm confident he'll be the kind of man who can handle both the wealth and the obligation that comes with it. The night this all started, when Michael mocked my pension check and called me a failure, I never could have imagined that the experience would ultimately bring us closer together. But sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most profound healing. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this story, it's this. Never assume you know someone's whole story based on what you can see. The quiet person in the corner might be fighting battles you can't imagine. The modest old man counting coupons might have more wisdom and resources than you realize. And if you're lucky enough to have family who love you, don't take that for granted. Love and respect can't be bought, but they can be lost. And once they're gone, all the money in the world can't buy them back. Fortunately for Michael and me, we learned that lesson before it was too late. But that's not the end of my story with hidden wealth and family drama. Next week, I'll tell you about the time my daughter-in-law tried to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could control my finances. She thought she was dealing with a confused old man with a small savings account. She had no idea what she was really up against. Until then, remember, treat everyone with kindness and respect. You never know who might be watching, who might be listening, or who might have the power to change your life forever. And sometimes the person you're looking down on might just be looking back up at you with the resources to teach you a lesson you'll never forget.